It all happened in the blink of an eye. A gunshot echoed through the open fields, sending a ripple of shock through the air. The horse buckled and collapsed, its body crumpling under the force of the bullet. The sound of hooves galloping desperately through the dirt had stopped, and the once proud animal now lay motionless on the ground. A moment ago, it was running free, now, it couldn't walk. The owner, standing frozen by the barn, watched as the horse struggled to get back up, its legs giving way beneath it. It was a sight no one ever wanted to witness. The horse, its once strong and graceful form now reduced to a helpless mass of pain, whinnied softly in distress. It couldn't stand. The owner rushed over, the panic in their chest rising like a wave. The horse's eyes were wide with confusion, pain, and fear. A single thought ran through the owner's mind: what now? In that moment, the world seemed to stop. There was no way to undo the damage. The bullet had torn through the horse's leg, leaving it shattered. The reality set in: the animal's ability to walk again was gone, perhaps forever. The owner had always been there for the horse. They had shared countless memories together, from racing down the dirt paths on warm summer mornings to quiet afternoons spent brushing its mane. But now, all of it seemed meaningless. What good was it to have a horse that could no longer run? What would be left for the animal, or for the owner, after such an unimaginable event? The owner stood there, heart sinking, hands trembling. Tears welled up in their eyes, not just for the horse, but for everything that had led to this moment. There was a time when the horse had been their source of strength, a companion through thick and thin. And now, in the blink of an eye, that bond had been tested in a way they never thought possible. But as the silence stretched, something unexpected happened. Instead of walking away in despair, the owner bent down beside the injured animal, their gaze unwavering. There was no plan, no clear answer. But one thing was certain: they weren't going to let go. Not yet. The community would never understand the decision that was about to be made. Friends, family, even strangers would all have opinions. Some might say that it was time to let the horse go, to end its suffering and move on. Others might argue that the best course of action was to let nature take its course. But none of them knew the connection, the deep, unspoken bond between the owner and the horse. They didn't know what it meant to have stood by each other through everything, no matter the odds. And so, as the horse lay there, unable to rise, the owner made a promise. They wouldn't give up. They wouldn't just let the animal suffer without a chance. They would find a way, even if it meant doing something no one could possibly understand. As the owner walked away from the scene, their heart heavy but resolute, they knew that this would not be a typical journey. The decision made was not one that would be understood immediately. But deep down, they knew it was the right one. The fight was just beginning, and they were determined to see it through. The world would soon learn the price of giving up on something you love. And the owner was about to show everyone just how far someone would go for loyalty, love, and the belief that no matter how tough things got, there was always a way forward. But it would take more than determination. It would take a level of sacrifice that no one could predict, and certainly no one could prepare for. This wasn't just about saving a horse. It was about proving that even in the face of the most impossible odds, something as simple as love and dedication could spark a change that no one saw coming. The morning light seeped through the wooden planks of the barn, casting a soft glow over the hay-strewn floor. The owner stood outside, gazing at the horizon, mind still clouded by the events of the previous day. The horse was still alive, but the damage had been done. The question remained: what now? The world seemed to expect only one answer, one that the owner wasn't willing to accept. Memories flooded back, carrying the weight of years spent with the horse. It hadn't been just an animal. It was a companion, a friend, a piece of the owner's very soul. The horse had come into the owner's life during a time of hardship. There had been loss, deep, gut-wrenching loss. The kind that made waking up feel like an impossible task. But the horse had changed everything. It had given the owner a reason to keep going, to find joy in the simple things. The two had spent endless days riding through open fields, feeling the wind against their skin, the rhythm of the gallop in sync with their heartbeat. The horse had been more than just a pet, it had been a symbol of survival, of perseverance through life's storms. But now? Now, that same horse lay in its stall, leg wrapped tightly in bandages, unable to stand. Its once bright eyes were dull, filled with pain and confusion. It didn't understand what had happened, why it couldn't move the way it used to. The owner could see it in the way the animal shifted, the way it tried, again and again, to rise, only to collapse back onto the straw-covered floor. The town had already begun whispering. It's cruel to keep it alive. It's just an animal, let it go. It will never be the same again. What's the point? The words cut deep, but the owner refused to listen. This horse had saved them once. Now, it was their turn to return the favor. And so, a decision was made. One that defied logic, went against expectations, and would be seen as foolish by nearly everyone. The owner would not let the horse go. Instead, they would fight. They would fight for the life of an animal that had given them everything. It wasn't going to be easy. The odds were stacked against them. The cost, both financial and emotional, would be immense. The struggle would be exhausting, draining every ounce of strength they had. But they didn't care. They would rather exhaust every possibility than live with the regret of not trying. With a deep breath, the owner stepped into the barn, kneeling beside the injured horse. "You're not done yet," they whispered, running a hand gently down its mane. The horse's ears flicked slightly. A small sign of life. It was enough. This wasn't the end. Not yet. The real battle was just beginning. The quiet hum of the morning was shattered by the sound of labored breathing. The horse lay motionless, its sides rising and falling in shallow movements. The once-spirited animal, which had once raced through the fields like the wind itself, now lay in the dimly lit barn, unable to stand. The owner knelt beside it, fingers gripping the coarse strands of its mane, heart pounding. The scent of hay and damp earth filled the space, but all the owner could focus on was the desperate struggle happening before their eyes. The events of the previous day replayed in their mind in a relentless loop, the sound of the gunshot, the panicked whinny, the way the horse had collapsed. It hadn't been an accident. That much was clear. But now was not the time for anger. Now was the time for action. The vet had come and gone, his words echoing in the owner's ears like a cruel verdict. The leg is shattered beyond repair. It won't be able to walk again. The humane thing to do is let it go. Let it go? The very thought sent a sharp pain through the owner's chest. How could they? How could they give up on something that had been with them through everything? The horse had been more than just an animal, it had been their rock, their companion when no one else was. The owner closed their eyes, fighting back the emotions that threatened to break them. This wasn't just about keeping the horse alive. It was about something deeper, loyalty, love, and the belief that giving up should never be the first choice. The town had already started whispering. They always did. The owners lost their mind. It's cruel to let the horse suffer. It's over, and they need to accept that. But the owner wasn't listening. Not to them. Not to their doubts. Not even to the part of themselves that whispered, maybe they're right. Instead, they focused on the horse, on the gentle rise and fall of its breath, on the small flicker of life still present in its eyes. "You're not done yet," the owner whispered, their voice barely above a breath. "And neither am I." The horse's ear twitched. A response. Small, but enough. The decision had been made. The owner would not let go. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with pain, frustration, and moments of doubt. But if there was even the smallest chance of saving the horse, of giving it a life worth living again, they would take it. No matter what it cost. no matter what anyone said. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the fight. The cold morning air seeped through the wooden walls of the barn as the owner sat beside the injured horse, exhaustion pressing down like a heavy weight. The animal's breathing was slow, its body motionless except for the occasional flick of an ear or shift of its head. The whispers in town had turned into full conversations. Everyone had an opinion. It's cruel to let the horse suffer like this. Why throw money at something that's hopeless? They should just put it down and move on. But the owner wasn't ready to listen. They had never been one to give up, and they weren't about to start now. Still, the weight of reality was beginning to settle in. The vet's words had been harsh but honest. Even if it survives, it will never walk again. The truth was like a knife to the chest. A horse that couldn't walk was a horse that couldn't run, couldn't be free. It wasn't just about survival, it was about quality of life. Would the animal even be happy? Would it understand why it was trapped in its own body? The owner's hands trembled as they ran them down the horse's mane, feeling the warmth of the creature that had once been so full of life. There had to be a way. The first attempt to help the horse stand had been a disaster. With a heavy heart, the owner had slipped a makeshift sling under its belly, using the strength of a pulley system to lift it onto its hooves. The moment the weight shifted, the horse collapsed with a pained cry, its injured leg unable to bear even the slightest pressure. The owner had collapsed beside it, guilt crashing over them like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a physical fight. It was a battle of the mind, the heart, and the soul. The easy choice would be to let go. But nothing about love and loyalty was ever easy. The horse had saved the owner once, in ways no one understood. It had given them purpose when they had been drowning in loss. It had pulled them through the darkest moments of their life, its steady presence a reminder that moving forward was always possible, even when it felt impossible. Now, the roles were reversed. For the first time, it was the owner's turn to be the strong one. To fight, even when the odds were stacked against them. But how? Then, an idea. A crazy idea. One that no one in town would understand. If the horse couldn't walk, then it wouldn't have to. Not in the way everyone expected. There were other ways. Other chances. But it would take time, money, and an unbelievable amount of patience. Could they really do it? As the first rays of sunlight crept through the barn doors, the owner looked at the horse, at the quiet strength in its eyes, the unwavering trust. Yes. They could. They would. And they didn't care what anyone else thought. This wasn't just about saving a horse. This was about proving that some things, some lives, were worth fighting for. No matter what it took. The town had made up its mind. The owner was delusional. They had seen horses go through worse, and in every case, the solution had always been the same: put the animal down and move on. It was the practical choice. The humane choice. The only choice. But the owner wasn't listening. For days, they had stayed by the horse's side, feeding it by hand, ensuring it was comfortable, whispering reassurances in the quiet of the barn. The horse didn't understand why it couldn't move. It tried, again and again, to stand, only to collapse in exhaustion. But the spirit in its eyes hadn't faded. That spirit was what the owner was fighting for. Late one night, after another failed attempt to help the horse stand, the owner sat in the dim barn, exhausted and mentally drained. They had tried every trick they could think of, but nothing was working. The reality of the situation gnawed at them. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe this was impossible. But then, a flicker of memory. A distant news story, something they had heard years ago but never paid much attention to. A racehorse that had broken its legs. The owner had refused to put it down. Instead, they had found a way to give it a new life. It wasn't easy. It wasn't cheap. But it was possible. Heart pounding, the owner rushed inside, flipping through old newspapers, searching the internet, making frantic notes. There was a way. It had been done before. Somewhere, someone had built prosthetics for horses. Could it work? The next morning, the owner wasted no time. They made the call. A specialist hours away had worked with injured horses before, rehabilitation, experimental treatments, anything to give them a second chance. But there was a problem. The specialist wasn't convinced. Most owners don't go through with it, they said. It takes patience. Time. Money. I don't care about the money, the owner interrupted. Just tell me if there's a chance. A pause. Then the answer that sent a jolt of hope through them. There's always a chance. And that was enough. The town thought it was over. The vet had already assumed the inevitable. But what none of them realized was that the owner had just begun the fight. The next few days were a whirlwind. The specialist agreed to visit, to see the horse in person before making any promises. The owner didn't tell anyone about the plan, not yet. There would be doubts, criticism, judgment. But the owner didn't need their approval. They only needed hope. And for the first time since the accident, that hope felt real. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The morning the specialist arrived, the town watched with quiet curiosity. No one believed in what the owner was trying to do. They whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads as if waiting for the inevitable moment when the owner would realize the truth, that they were chasing a hopeless dream. But the owner wasn't listening. The specialist stepped out of their vehicle, a sharp-eyed professional with years of experience. They moved with quiet confidence as they approached the barn, their gaze settling on the injured horse lying motionless on the hay-covered floor. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the specialist knelt beside the animal, running a careful hand over its leg. "He's in pain," the specialist murmured. The owner nodded, heart pounding. "Can you help him?" The specialist sighed. "It won't be easy." "I don't care about easy," the owner said firmly. "I just need to know if it's possible." The specialist hesitated. Then, they said something that made the owner's breath catch. "It depends on him," they said, nodding toward the horse. Some animals lose the will to fight. They give up before the healing even begins. If he's still got that fire in him, there's a chance. The owner turned to the horse, watching as its tired eyes flickered up toward them. "He won't give up," the owner said. "Neither will I." The plan was set into motion. The first steps of recovery. The horse couldn't stand on its own, and that was the first battle they had to face. The specialist introduced a custom support sling, a system of straps and pulleys designed to lift the animal just enough to take pressure off the wounded leg. It was painful. Exhausting. The first time they tried, the horse thrashed in protest, unable to comprehend what was happening. The owner stood nearby, whispering reassurances. "You're okay," they murmured, running a hand along the horse's neck. "You're safe. We'll get through this." The struggle lasted hours. Days. The horse would rise for a few minutes, then collapse in frustration. Every failure felt like a punch to the gut, but the owner refused to stop. The specialist worked tirelessly, showing the owner new methods, bringing in equipment that no one in town had ever seen before. And yet, the whispers continued. "Why don't they just let it go? This is a waste of time. It's cruel to put the horse through this." But the owner wasn't listening. Because something incredible was happening. The horse wasn't giving up. Every day, it fought harder. It began to hold itself up a little longer. The panic in its eyes faded, replaced with quiet determination. And then, one morning, it stood. No pulleys. No support. Just for a second, but it stood. The owner barely breathed, afraid to move, afraid that if they blinked, it would all disappear. But it was real. The fight wasn't over. There were still months of healing ahead, and the road would be long. But in that moment, the owner knew, they had made the right decision. The town could talk all they wanted. The vet could keep doubting. But the owner had just witnessed a miracle. And they weren't stopping now. The progress had been slow, but it was progress. For weeks, the owner had poured everything into the horse's recovery, early mornings, sleepless nights, every ounce of strength they had. And for a while, it felt like they were winning. The horse had stood on its own. It had taken a few shaky steps, proving that it wanted to fight just as much as its owner did. But then, as if the universe had been waiting for the perfect moment, things took a turn. The horse stopped trying. At first, the owner thought it was exhaustion. They adjusted the schedule, gave it more rest, but the problem didn't go away. The horse refused to stand. It had lost the fire. The specialist warned them, this happens sometimes. If an animal doesn't believe it can recover, it won't. The words sent a chill through the owner. Had they come this far just to lose? The town was already watching, waiting for them to fail. Told you so. All that work for nothing. They should have listened from the start. The doubt crept in, whispering in the back of the owner's mind. What if they had been wrong? What if they had made the horse suffer for nothing? But deep down, something told them this wasn't the end. Not yet. They just had to figure out why the horse had stopped fighting. A risky gamble. The specialist suggested a break. Time to rest, to recover. But the owner wasn't convinced. They weren't dealing with an ordinary animal. This horse had always been more than that. And then, it hit them. The horse wasn't refusing to stand because it was weak. It was afraid. For months, the only thing it had known was pain. Every time it tried to move, it had been met with failure, frustration, and exhaustion. Maybe it didn't believe standing was possible anymore. Which meant the owner had to make it believe again. So they did the unthinkable. They led another horse into the barn. A healthy horse. One that still ran like the wind, just like theirs had once. At first, there was no reaction. The injured horse barely lifted its head, uninterested. But then, something flickered in its eyes. Recognition. Memory. A spark of something lost. The healthy horse grazed near the stall, then turned and trotted away. It was so simple, just a normal movement, nothing dramatic. But to the injured horse, it was a reminder. A challenge. A few days passed, and then, it happened. The injured horse tried to follow. It struggled, yes. It nearly fell. But it tried. The owner's heart pounded. This was the moment they had been waiting for. A breakthrough. The town wouldn't believe it. The vet would still be skeptical. But the owner didn't care. Because for the first time, they saw the fire return. And they knew, the fight was far from over. The owner stood frozen, barely breathing as they watched the horse shift its weight. It wasn't much, just the slight press of its uninjured leg, a small movement as it tried to stand again. But it was everything. The healthy horse trotted away, stopping just outside the barn as if waiting, as if challenging the injured one to follow. For a long moment, nothing happened. The injured horse exhaled heavily, ears flicking forward. Then, with a grunt of effort, it tried again. The first attempt failed. The second was worse, it nearly collapsed. But on the third try, something different happened. The horse didn't fall. It wobbled, strained, but it stayed standing. The owner's heart pounded in their chest. This was the moment they had been waiting for. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was happening. The horse was standing. Tears stung the owner's eyes as they stepped closer, reaching out a hand to run down the horse's sweat-dampened neck. "You did it," they whispered. "You're still here." The healthy horse neighed softly, as if in approval. The owner didn't let the moment pass. They had learned by now that the horse's body needed movement, even if it was slow, even if it was difficult. So they took a step back. "Come on," they urged. "Just one step." The horse hesitated. The entire barn seemed to hold its breath. And then, it took one shaky step forward. The owner let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. It was a miracle. Not just because the horse was moving, but because it was fighting again. A second chance. The next few weeks were grueling. The owner worked tirelessly with the specialist, introducing custom braces and physical therapy to help the horse regain strength. Some days, it felt impossible. The pain, the exhaustion, the doubt, it all crept in, whispering that maybe this was as far as they could go. But every time the horse wobbled, every time it fell, it got back up. The whispers in town began to change. People who had once doubted the owner's decision now stood in awe. "I can't believe it's still alive. It's actually walking. I thought they were crazy, but look at that." It didn't matter what they had thought before. What mattered was the fight had been worth it. The owner no longer cared about proving anyone wrong. Because this was never about them. It was about a promise, the promise to never give up. And now, that promise was being fulfilled. One step at a time. The battle wasn't over. The horse would never race across fields the way it once did. But that didn't mean it had no life left to live. And the owner would make sure it lived that life to the fullest. For the first time since the accident, the owner felt something they hadn't in a long time. Hope. The hardest part was over. Now, it was time to show the world that sometimes, when you refuse to give up, miracles happen. The morning sun bathed the fields in golden light as the owner led the horse out of the barn. For the first time in months, there was no sling, no support, no hesitation. The horse walked. Not perfectly. Not without effort. But it walked. Tears burned in the owner's eyes as they watched their companion take slow, deliberate steps. Every movement told a story of pain, of struggle, of a battle that no one believed could be won. The town had stopped whispering. The vet who once said it was impossible now stood nearby, arms crossed, watching in silent amazement. Even the doubters, the ones who had mocked the owner's efforts, had to admit the truth. "I thought they were crazy. I was sure they were wasting their time. But look at them now." But the owner wasn't thinking about them. They were thinking about everything this journey had taught them. Some battles are worth fighting. There had been moments of doubt, dark, painful moments where giving up felt like the only option. But the owner had held on. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. The world had tried to tell them it was impossible. But they had refused to listen. Because sometimes, the hardest fights are the ones that matter most. The horse had fought too. Even when it had been easier to surrender, it had kept pushing forward. And now, here they were, still standing, still fighting, still proving that giving up was never the answer. A new beginning. The horse would never run the way it once did. The scars would always be there, a reminder of the battle they had faced together. But that didn't matter. Because life wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about resilience. About finding new ways to move forward, even when the odds were stacked against you. The owner knew their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. And as they watched their horse take another step forward, they realized something. This wasn't just about saving the horse. It was about proving that hope is never lost. That when you refuse to give up, even in the face of the impossible, miracles can happen. And sometimes, those miracles start with just one step.